Welcome to Pensari Basketball Live. Today we are going to be talking about the Toronto Raptors. Of course, what else? And we're going to talk about some lineup shifts that could happen, that should happen for the Toronto Raptors. Now, look, I know that it is prevailing fan psychology that your five best players should start. But if we look at NBA history, whether you're talking about the dynastic Boston Celtics, whether you're talking about the San Antonio Spurs bringing Manu Ginobili off the bench, I think this is more a byproduct of modern culture thinking, I need to hear my name in the starting lineup. The truth is that most teams have 2, 3, maximum 4 featured guys. And whoever starts with those guys in the starting lineup typically is the player who can most maximize those players. And so I want to rethink who should be starting on this team by evaluating 8 different lineups, taking you through them, giving you my pros and cons for each, and just trying to understand, if we change the solution, if we change the equation from who should be the starters to who are the 2 best players to put next to a trio of Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam, could we come up with perhaps players that fit a little bit better than Dennis Schroeder? Dennis Schroeder, I'm trying to get better at saying that name correctly. German fans have been quite upset with me calling him Schroeder. So Schroeder, I'm trying. And Jakob Poeltl, right? So let's hit that intro and I will take you through the 8. This is not going to be a super long live. I do have a lot to get to this afternoon, but just wanted to get my thoughts down on this. Alrighty, so let's talk about this. Look, this is not Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili. This is not Larry Bird. There are, in my opinion, no superstars on this team. There might be a superstar ascending in the waiting wings. Maybe Pascal Siakam can take that jump. Maybe Scottie Barnes can take that jump. I have my doubts that OG Anunoby will take that jump. But regardless, however you slice it, these are your 3 guys. Okay, 2 of them are heading into a contract year, notwithstanding. I don't think that anyone is looking at this team now. Fred VanVleet out of the way, gone. Kyle Lowry gone. Kawhi Leonard gone. These are your 3 featured guys. They're the guys that you got to build this whole thing around, and they are not perfect players. 2 of them can't really shoot all that well. Will what we saw last night, Pascal Siakam letting it go from 3, hitting his shots, Scottie Barnes looking a lot more comfortable from 3. Is that going to help? Yes. But is that going to turn them into Steph Curry and Klay Thompson? No. So even if they can do the bare minimum, which is take the ones that are open and hit it at a half decent, slightly below league average clip, I think that helps. It certainly helps. But I don't think that it is making you a dynamic offense. Now, conventional wisdom says, well, you don't have to be dynamic offense. There are a lot of teams that are halfway competitive and they're not really great offensively. The Raptors will earn their stripes on defense. And that is where the rationale and the thought process behind starting a guy like Dennis Schroeder and Jakob Poeltl comes into play. Jakob Poeltl is an above average, very above average center, in my opinion, probably one of the 12, 13 best centers in the NBA, if you could take a draft of it. And Dennis Schroeder, for all of his, averageness throughout his career, and believe me, his career has been quite average for a rotation player in the NBA now, well into his prime. He is an above average point of attack defender, and that is really his saving grace. Where he struggles is basically everywhere else on defense. So the thought process is you can pressure the ball, You can protect the paint. You can be pretty switchable. But can you? And therein lies the first question here. Can you be super switchable? Can Jakob Poeltl go out and, defend a guard or a wing? No, probably not. Can Dennis Schroeder cross match on a big in transition or even a big wing? No, I don't think so. I think he's very slight of build, and I think he's going to struggle. So you do have in Dennis Schroeder and Jakob Poeltl, you are starting to approach very conventional territory. But here's the part of your lineup that's very unconventional. Apart from Pascal Siakam, who is solid, I don't think Scottie Barnes is a conventional shooting guard, not in terms of on-ball creation, not in terms of shooting. And I don't think OG Anunoby is necessarily a conventional offensive small forward for a really good team. Does he remind you of Jason Tatum? Does he remind you of Luka Doncic? And I'm not saying that's the only way to be a small forward. I am, however, saying that the small forward skill set is one that lends itself to at least a little bit of, dribble creation, slashing. And this is just not where OG Anunoby has thrived as an isolation scorer. So where is your isolation scoring coming from? Oh, well, 0.5 offense, right? That's the solution, right? We're just going to make quick decisions. Doesn't work that way. Basketball doesn't work that way. You need advantage generation somewhere in your lineup. You need to be able to do the opposite for the other team. And so I think if we can take off our blinders, we can take off this guy makes this much money, this guy has this much tenure, this guy has this much pull within the organization, and simply open this up to a rational discussion of, if you were making a 5-on-5 run, just pretend like 2K on court or just on the playground, and you had 3 guys already on your team, which is Scottie, OG, and Pascal, and you had an open draft to take 2 more guys to run 5-on-5 with, who will you take to maximize those 3 guys? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. Like, who are your 2 guys? Would you take Grady? Would you take Gary? Would you take Dennis? Would you take Jakob? Would you take Otto? Who would you take? And I'm going to give you 8 options. I'm going to give you 8 options, and I'll lay out what the good and bad of all of it is. And hopefully, look, I love that yesterday Blake Murphy tweeted out that, give me more Jeff Dowtin Jr. minutes, or I'm going back to baseball. I thought that was hilarious. I think the support for this guy is building up a little bit. Rue saying Dennis and Gary Trent Jr. See, it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. I get the rationale on this, right? You want to maximize shooting. You get the on-ball creation, a little bit more on-ball creation, some pick-and-roll playmaking with Dennis and Gary Trent. But now I think you suffer in terms of rim protection, because Jakob Poeltl, Christian Koloko, to some extent Precious Achiuwa, and Chris Boucher, these are your rim protectors. I mean, Scottie Barnes is average to above average rim protector. I don't think Pascal Siakam is there. I don't think OG Anunoby necessarily. You want to have OG Anunoby navigating those screens on the perimeter. You don't want him camping back just because he's the best guy who can do it. I also think you probably struggle in terms of rebounding. I mean, you want to put Pascal Siakam against Joel Embiid and see how fast he fouls out. This is not. I understand, and if you could have six players, I get this, but this I think might be beefy. Yeah, Raptors players only. We can open this up to 2 other guys. I mean, let me know. I mean, across the NBA, who are the 2 guys? And please don't pick superstars. Don't be like Jason Tatum and Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, like just rotation guys. Think starters that are non-stars. Like, who would you put next to those 3 guys if you could? Would you put an Onyeka Okongwu? I don't think so. Would you put a Brook Lopez? Now that's starting to make a little bit of sense. A stretch big. Would you put a Miles Turner? Would you put guys like that? Would you put maybe a very dynamic, downhill guard, right? Would you put a TJ McConnell? Well, he can't really shoot, So it's like when you're building around 3 sort of imperfect players, and among the 3, maybe Pascal Siakam is the closest to perfected player in terms of easiest to put something around. I think with OG and Scottie, you have like sort of one guy, has one issue, the other guy has the other issue, offensively and defensively. With Scottie, I think it's, if you put him into a lot of screen navigation stuff, he's probably going to struggle, right? With OG, I think you need to keep him more out on the perimeter. Not that he can't guard the post, he totally can, but I think it negates some of his value. With Siakam, I think you probably want to keep it away from him being the back line of your defense because I think you're going to struggle defensively there. These guys need shooters around them. Kyrie and Booker. Bro, I just said no stars, and you named two of the most talented players in the league. Come on, man. Okay. All right, let's get to these lineups. Bilal Coulibaly. He's looked great, but yeah. Onyeka is awesome. I really like him, honestly. Like I made it clear this offseason. Like any Pascal Siakam trade, I would want him, but it doesn't seem like the Hawks are willing to let it go. Dowtin, nice. You're already ahead of me. Okay. Outside of Raptors, Anthony Simons and Miles Turner. That's interesting. I mean, but who's your point of attack defender there? Anthony Simons can't guard his shadow. Miles Turner is not a great rebounder, although a very fantastic shot blocker. I mean, this does give you the ability offensively to be incredible, and you might think that defensively, all of the breakdowns that Simons is going to create for you. I mean, God, if you saw Fred VanVleet was leaking oil at the top, wait till you see Anthony Simons try to guard a pick and roll. I mean, he's clueless. He's truly clueless. Interestingly enough, I would love Scoot Henderson and Miles Turner. That would be interesting. That would be very interesting. I think that could work. Actually, that would be a perfect basketball team. That would be incredible. I would need a little bit more. I understand offensively, this is great, and you really could play 5 out, and it would be amazing to watch offensively. I think defensively, you might struggle more than you think. Okay, let's go into these 8 lineups. Okay, option 1. This is the lineup the Raptors have been running out, right? Dennis Schroeder, Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Jakob Poeltl. Couple of strong advantages with this one, right? You have point of attack defense, you have backline defense. I think the thought process behind this is two-pronged. Number one, you have pretty solid, versatile defense, and this does put Barnes, Anunoby, and Siakam into positions where they can be most effective defensively. Offensively, it's playmaking, right? Jakob Poeltl is definitely, Christian Koloko notwithstanding, definitely your best pure big playmaker. And if, Darko Rajakovic talking about, using him, like potentially using him like Domantas Sabonis, he's not Domantas Sabonis. Don't even think about it. But, humility aside, with all due respect, Darko Rajakovic, he's not Domantas Sabonis. I've watched both these players play. I know they were, drafted very close to each other in the draft. He's not. He has different sets of advantages and disadvantages. And I think the biggest difference is Domas can hit, a 16, 17-foot jumper. If Jakob Poeltl could hit a 17 to 18-foot jumper, I tell you, the entire prospects of this team would be completely different, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But he can't, and we are, right? Because at this moment, he's kind of clogging up the middle a lot, right? And that's sucking up a lot of the space that you need for. And it's one thing, the Raptors have talked about, adding that. It's not really a 3-point line, but it's like an initiation line, which is like 6 or 7 feet behind the 3-point line, where they want their offense to space out. Now, if you've watched a really well-spaced offense, Golden State Warriors, Mike D'Antoni's Houston Rockets, if you've watched teams genuinely play 5 out, usually you can get away with one non-shooter who's like I don't mean a non-shooter, they have to be willing to shoot, but like a not so great shooter who is willing to take them, right? So that's how I think you could work 5 out. And then that player becomes, and provided they still have the ability to slash. So the spacing is useless if you A, can't shoot, and B, can't drive. So let's just say that we're locked into OG, Pascal, and Scottie. You're not benching any of those guys that I want to hear it. You're not benching those guys. So let's say that the part of this equation that is set and there are no variables when it comes to those 3 players, then really the only variables are who are the other 2 players you're starting around them, and what position are you putting those players in? Are you starting Scottie at 1? Are you starting Scottie at 5? Are you starting Pascal at 4, 5? You putting OG at the 3 or the 5? These are all versatile players. I think they can all play 3 to 4 different positions. So the question then becomes, is like, what do you want to do with these players. Could you potentially entertain the idea of starting Pascal Siakam at the one? Offensively, it would be very interesting. Defensively, I think he would struggle a lot. I think point of attack, with quicker guards, I think he would really struggle. So you have to consider both sides of this. Offensively, it might work. Defensively, you might struggle. So let's go to a slight alteration with option number 2. And the alteration, of course, is what we expected coming into this season, which is Gary Trent Jr. in place of Dennis Schroeder. What does this do for the Raptors? Well, I think it gives you a little bit better shooting. Okay. So it improves your spacing by a bit, but it reduces some of your point of attack defense. As we saw, Gary Trent Jr. has struggled with point of attack defense massively. Scottie Barnes has struggled with screen navigation pretty much his whole career because he's very tall, very high hips. He doesn't have the most flexible, hips. So really you're leaving everything when it comes to guard and wing defense really on OG Anunoby. I think this lineup could struggle. And we saw a lot of this lineup last year. And, in times they looked good, but they definitely did struggle with screen navigation. And I think with the NBA just running so much more pick and roll, I think you need to have some sort of contingency plan that's better than, well, Jakob Poeltl can clean it up. He's not Hakeem Olajuwon, right? Like he's his at rim defense, while maybe 3 years ago was like really something to hold up to the light. I think it's more or less sinking to above league average right now. And I don't think that this is the type of guy like a Ben Wallace type who can just clean up everything in the back line. Like this is not who Jakob Poeltl is at this point. He's a very solid defender. He operates very well in the low post. But in terms of, quickly erasing a lot of mistakes, I don't necessarily think he's that guy right now in terms of like a high profile shot blocker. Like he's good. He's not great. So he's going to be a part of the solution. He's not going to be the solution for you. So I think that this lineup, while it creates one positive, which is I think Gary Trent Jr. is a better shot creator. I think he's a better shooter. I think he just has a little bit more size, so maybe he'll have a little bit less difficulty guarding up against wings, right? The other thing, it puts a lot of pressure on Pascal Siakam and Scottie Barnes to initiate the offense. And while Siakam does have some burst and some shiftiness to his handle, I think Scottie is still a work in progress in that regard. And so, you might need a secondary creator next to these two guys to really help. And I think that really is the rationale behind why this lineup has been the Raptors' first option so far, because Dennis Schroeder does provide that secondary creator. He can break down the defense a little bit, get into the paint. You need someone to collapse. You need someone to collapse the middle, especially when spacing is so poor. Let's try lineup number 3 on for size and see what changes with lineup 3. Okay, so we're gonna make 2 alterations here. So the first alteration is, Gary Trent Jr. coming in for Dennis Schroeder. The second option, the second alteration is Precious Achiuwa coming in for Jakob Poeltl. What does Jakob Poeltl not do that Precious Achiuwa does do? Number 1, I think it makes you faster. Number 2, it makes you more switchable. You never have to worry about Precious Achiuwa guarding a wing or even guarding a guard. If he's dialed in, if he's focused, we saw it in spurts last year when OG Anunoby went out and the Raptors slid Precious Achiuwa to the starting lineup. I think we saw very clear evidence that this is a guy who has the potential. We have also seen it in the Philadelphia series. We've seen it in spurts. Can he put it together consistently? You know what else we've seen in spurts from Precious Achiuwa? Shooting. There was an entire 3-month stretch that I can't stop talking about towards the end of Scottie's rookie season, which was the 21-22 season, where Precious Achiuwa was just lights out from the corner, from the top, above the break. I mean, he was, I can't tell you defenses were really respecting it, but I tell you, once they start to respect it, he does have some small forward skills. So really what this does is it gives you 4 defenders that can switch 1 through 5. And it gives you one guy who you just have to cover for in Gary Trent Jr. It also allows you to play 5 out. Now, it won't be the most effective version of 5 out. You're not necessarily having Brook Lopez spacing the top, but at least you can put Precious Achiuwa at the corner or at the top and trust that when he gets the ball, A, that he's going to take the shot, and B, that at the very least, in an ideal world, he can make it at a 32 to 35% clip, which is not killing your offense. Trust me, the offense we saw last year, 35% three-point shooter at the center spot would be a godsend for this team. But once again, you end up with the same problem with the previous lineup, which is where's your creation? Actually, as much as Darko Rajakovic has talked up Precious Achiuwa being a really good passer, and he's really willing passer and all that stuff, and as much as I think that in transition this is going to really show up, I think he struggles in the half court. He's not nearly as smart a player as Jakob Poeltl. I don't think you can put the ball in his hands and say, okay, go find us something, go find the advantage. I think he'll struggle in that situation. So you're getting a drop off in playmaking. You're getting an uptick in, I think the rebounding is pretty dead even between him and Jakob, if you want my honest opinion. I think he's a really good rebounder offensively, defensively. I think you get faster. I think you get more switchable, but you probably get a lot less efficient too, right? Jakob Poeltl around the paint, say what you will about the fact that he has limited range and a limited, whatever. He's very effective around the rim. And you do need these guys to some extent. You need a Mitchell Robinson or a Dwight Powell. You need these guys who hit their shots around the rim. It does. But in order to make someone like a Jakob Poeltl most effective at what he does, you need space. See, the irony of things, in a 5-out offense, ideally okay, let me just briefly take a detour from my lineup construction to anyone who doesn't really understand why spacing is so important. I just want to explain it very briefly. Imagine a team with someone like a Steph Curry, a Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, guys like this, okay? When you put these guys 22, 25, 28 feet from the basket, what does it do to the defense? It spreads you out. Now, these guys are like basically decoys at this point. Yes, they're going to get their 25 to 30 points. Everyone knows that, but because you have to pay attention to them. Now, if you're the defensive coach here, what do you do with Steph Curry at 27 feet on the top and Kevin Durant at the key, like right around there? Anywhere you put a superstar, there's always 2 to 3 eyes on them. So this is why teams aspire to trade for superstars. But you don't have to have necessarily superstars with the gravitational or marquee of a Steph Curry or whatever to do this. You can do this like the Kings did this last year. Now, Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, what do these guys have in common? They shoot. They can shoot really well. What does Domantas Sabonis do? He passes really well. So while I understand the theory of this, there's no player in the starting lineup right now that has the movement shooting capabilities of a Kevin Huerter. And I don't think that Scottie is Keegan Murray as a shooter right now. So this is where you struggle immensely, right? When you think about trying to implement what the Kings did. Furthermore, Dennis Schroeder is not De'Aaron Fox as a penetrator, as a finisher, as a shot creator. So if you want to become the watered down version of the Sacramento Kings last year with a slight improvement on Pascal Siakam over Harrison Barnes, if that's your magic construction for making the playoffs, I shit you not, you might be like a playing team. But I think there is a way to make this work. Now, to get back to the spacing element, who does spacing really benefit? It benefits the role players. It benefits your tertiary, fourth, fifth options. It massively benefits your rim rollers. It benefits your guys like Kevon Looney. It benefits guys like Draymond Green, who are just given wider lanes to attack with space. And for a team that has 2 to 3 guys, I mean, really, all 3 guys, I think that Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Scottie Barnes have a lot in common. And one of the things that they have in common is they all need space. They all need space to drive. Siakam needs a little less space, but Scottie and OG need a lot of space to drive. They cannot drive into congested, paints. They cannot drive. I mean, with Scottie, it's getting there, and I think it could get there with some work. And he does have this ability to sort of post up and get into his bag, and he's a better passer than OG. So maybe, the double or the triple or the congested paint is actually a good thing. But just to get past his guy, space would help a lot. It would help a lot. Wider angles to attack would help a lot. If you remember last year when Scottie took, the Brooklyn Nets to the woodshed and gave and basically whipped their ass. What was happening that was so weird? Ben Simmons was picking up Scottie Barnes like 40 feet from the basket. Now, I don't know why he was doing that. I don't know why their coaching staff decided to do that. But when, even against a great defender like Ben Simmons, the offensive player, if playing 40 feet out, with even all the limitations of a Scottie Barnes in terms of handle, the offensive player is at a massive advantage because the offensive player knows where he's going. The defensive player does not. Now, in 20 feet of space, this is going to be to the defensive player's advantage if the defensive player is as good as Ben Simmons. However, in the 40 feet of space, 35 feet of space, this is cookies for guys like Siakam, even OG Anunoby, and definitely for Scottie Barnes. So adding this extra space allows for wider angles to attack, which allows for guys like Jakob Poeltl also to be successful. Let's continue on and start talking about these more serious lineups. Okay, so we got option number 4. Now, let's take all of the, Jakob Poeltl is effective, Precious Achiuwa might be able to shoot, and let's just replace all of this with a guy that we know can shoot and pray to God that he is healthy. And that is just putting Otto Porter Jr. at the 5. Now, I think criminally slept on player, probably one of the most underrated players in the NBA, and definitely a guy who has the girth, size, and defensive instincts and length to play small ball center in certain situations. He played a lot of small ball center for the Warriors. I think they were very effective spacing out with him. He gives you a lot. He gives you a lot. He may not be the quickest guy, but he is super smart. He gives you a little bit of the playmaking that you get from guys like Thaddeus Young and Jakob Poeltl. If you really look at what the Raptors are prioritizing with their bigs, apart from Chris Boucher, almost all of them can play make at an above average rate for bigs. So I think Otto Porter could be in a pinch. Maybe, this could be a specialty lineup where teams are really, really trying to collapse the middle and trying to stick to the paint a little bit. If you really want to space them out and create some driving lanes for Scottie Barnes, I mean, this is a lineup. I mean, you really are putting your 2 best shooters next to your 3 slashers. How does this not make sense? Now, defensively, could you struggle here? Maybe. I mean, there is a drop off in terms of rim protection and rebounding from Otto Porter Jr. to Precious Achiuwa and Jakob Poeltl. However, I will say that he's probably on par with. I think he's better defender than Precious Achiuwa. He's a slightly worse, and he's definitely a worse rebounder than those 2 guys for sure. So I think that you're just gonna have to trust that you're so big at the other positions with Scottie, OG, and Siakam that the rebounding is not going to become a massive issue for you. I think if he's your slowest player, guess who's popping up above the break? Otto Porter. It puts so much pressure on the defense because despite the new NBA, bigs are still kind of used to sagging back to the paint. If he's the guy who's trailing the play every single time, I mean, that is just 15 to 20 easy points a game until the defense adjusts. So I think, having a center, having a guy at that position who is a lights out shooter and just having Darko Rakovic tell him, if you're open, I don't ever want to see you pass green light all day, all night, take the shot. It doesn't have to be for 35 minutes a night. I don't think Otto can play 35 minutes a night for you, but if he could just get the starters off to a quick start, pun not intended, I think it'd be great. And Gary Trent Jr. also. However, this lineup once again suffers from the, typical woes of how much creation do you have with just Scottie and Pascal? Can OG, Otto, Gary make up for, some of the paint, breakdown, pick and roll, ball handling, creation stuff that you got from Fred and now you're getting from Dennis Schroeder? I think maybe not. So maybe the lineup shift there would be, okay, well, screw Gary and let's put Dennis Schroeder back. But now you're super small, and I don't think Dennis contributes very well to the glass. And now I think, maybe some of your shooting issues are once again there because you still have Scottie and Dennis Schroeder. And I know that Dennis Schroeder is a better 3-point shooter than Scottie Barnes. But if you have a lineup, 3 guys on the court that I don't have to chase off the line, and Dennis and Scottie and Pascal, like where I'm willing to live with those 3 guys, I think it makes life a little bit harder for guys like Otto and Gary. So it's maybe that is the best of all worlds. But let's get a little bit more crazy and creative. And that really is this. I think this lineup could make some sense, and this is exactly what I just talked about, which is replacing Dennis Schroeder with Gary Trent. Now, of course, please do not consider this slight against Jakob Poeltl. This has nothing to do with Jakob Poeltl. I am, however, just saying this from the perspective, and I like the guy. I like him a lot. I think he's a really good player. He might be, I've already said, he's one of the 13 best centers in the NBA. And, you might be saying, how dare you not start him? Well, there's actually a reason for not wanting to start him, and this lineup doesn't exactly solve it. But my final lineup, my lineup number 8, is going to explain why I would bring Jakob Poeltl off the bench. Now, let's move on to number 6. The introduction of Jeff Dowtin Jr. I've slowly been kind of working my way to this. Now, this is basically a 1-for-1 swap, Schroeder for Dowtin Jr. What does Dowtin Jr. do that Dennis Schroeder does not do? Well, here's the thing. What is your rationale for starting Dennis Schroeder? I think, first of all, is point of attack defense. And number 2 is dribble drive creation, secondary creator, somebody who can take off some of the responsibilities of setting up and organizing the offense from Scottie and Pascal Siakam. I think I just described Jeff Dowtin's game to a T. However, I will tell you one thing. For all of the credit that Dennis Schroeder gets as a point of attack defender, I definitely think I'm not. I hope I'm not in the minority in saying I think Jeff Dowtin Jr. is your best point of attack defender outside of OG Anunoby on this team. He's posted a positive defensive plus minus like the last 2 years. Almost his entire career, he's been a positive defender. You could see last year, anytime the Raptors had like a super quick, it was Jaden Ivey. I think it was Jaden Ivey. The Nick Nurse knew that Fred VanVleet was going to get massively exposed, like for 40 points against Jaden Ivey, because Fred has his old hips and issues with lateral quickness right now. So that's when Jeff Dowtin was used. So my question is, at what point is having Jeff Dowtin guarding the opposing point guard ever going to be a liability for you? See, I understand sometimes, you have a super big defender to go up against a really big lineup, but please find me a point guard that Jeff Dowtin Jr. cannot reasonably, in my opinion, be the best option for defensively. Now, you say, well, what about the offense, Rob? Well, if OG, Pascal, and Scottie need their touches, right? And if Jakob Poeltl is apparently about to morph into Domantas Sabonis, well, then I really like my option of having a 5th starter with those guys who's basically willing to take 0 to 1 shots, but someone who has the shooting chops and capability. And trust me, I charted all this guy's possessions. I watched him in 905. He can shoot. He can shoot. Okay. Now, this is not unconventional. There are a lot of teams out there that have started a 5th starter. I mentioned in yesterday's live too, that may not necessarily strike you as the 5th best player on the team. And Jeff Dowtin, I'm not making a case that he's the 5th best player on the team. I am, however, making a case that he fits very well with the starting unit, and he gives you every single thing that Dennis Schroeder does. However, what Jeff Dowtin starting gives you is a backup punch of Dennis Schroeder and Gary Trent coming off the bench, which, by the way, if you watch last year's Raptors, can you imagine those two checking in? Like, it would be a vibe, man. And it allows Dennis Schroeder to be who he has always been, which is a super high usage playmaker, scorer, slasher, shooter. I mean, if you go back and chart his usage rates, they are on par with guys like Siakam. Like, he really dominates possessions. He's a player that likes the ball in his hands a lot. So if you have OG wanting more on-ball reps, Pascal wanting to make All-NBA, plus Scottie Barnes wanting to be point guard, Dennis Schroeder is like too many cooks in the kitchen, in my opinion. So maybe he can adjust a little bit, but instincts take over, man. We saw this with Fred VanVleet too. Instincts take over. People generally tend to become who they are. And if by the end of the season, someone has an injury, you're going to see a lot of Dennis Schroeder doing a lot of what he did in Atlanta, a lot of what he did in OKC, which is great. But he was a 6th man for some of those teams, right? It's great for a 6th man. I think this starting thing, just my opinion, may not work out for the best. I understand Darko has a pre-existing relationship with him, and it's great, and he serves a lot of benefits and needs and whatever. But I'm telling you, the point of attack defense is a little bit overstated. I think Jeff Dowtin is better as a point of attack defender, not as a player, but as a point of attack defender, as someone who can set and table your offense as an athlete, I think he's a little bit bigger. He is better defensively, and he's low maintenance, man. I think Jeff Dowtin. I think like what was that? Don't quote me on these numbers, but it's like Dennis Schroeder, 26 to 30% usage. Jeff Dowtin's like 10 to 12. Like he's just the most, like, you just watch him. go to a game and watch Jeff Dowtin play with like better players, with starting in. He is so off the ball. He's just doing all the little things, runs in transition, fills the lanes. He's doing everything right. He's doing everything you need from a fifth starter. If you recall, the Spurs notoriously, they started Rasha Nesterovic over better players when they had, because it just fit. Right. They brought Manu Ginobili off the bench. The Detroit Pistons, if you remember, under was it under Rick Carlisle, where or Kevin O'Neal? I can't remember where they brought Michael Curry. They started Michael Curry. Why would you start Michael Curry? He's a great defender. Bruce Bowen's a great example, right? Bruce Bowen was not one of the most talented players on the team. He was a half decent defender, but he could sit in the corner and shoot. You need role players, man. You need role players with stars. And if you think Scottie, OG, and Pascal can blossom into stars, I think you need to put role players around them that make sense, that do not make their lives harder. And I understand, like sometimes you're thinking to yourself, I want my two best players to start with these players because these players aren't that great to begin with. But does starting a high usage, pick and roll ball handling point guard like Dennis Schroeder and having the big try to, if Dennis Schroeder and Jakob Poeltl are your version of De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, you're fucked, right? You understand that, you get that, right? Because it doesn't work that way, because the other three guys, they need to all be able to shoot, and per my calculation, only one of them can really, really space the corner. So it's I understand the thought process. I'm just trying to get ahead of it before we get behind it and we open up 2 and 10, right? Okay, let's move on. We already talked about that. Okay. This, I think, is also an interesting one. And this, of course, puts Otto Porter Jr. in place of Jakob Poeltl. And now you really are starting to get into genius territory when it comes to lineup construction around these three players, because you have two super low usage guys who can actually space, guys who can shoot, right? Guys who are incredible defenders. I think this might be your best defensive unit. Now, you're small. Somehow, with a lineup this big, you're now suddenly small. And I think that could be the only drawback to this lineup, is that you're small. But I think Otto and Jeff are really smart players. I think they could play off like three players really freaking well. Your spacing could be incredible. You could actually put four guys out and you could allow Barnes to cook, or Siakam to cook, or Anunoby to isolate. You could really exploit the space here. I think this is not Golden State. This is not D'Antoni's, Houston Rockets, but it's getting into the right frame of mind to put something like that together. And finally, this is the lineup that I would actually go with. And this is, if I was coaching the Raptors, I mean, y'all can pray that I'm not coaching the Raptors, but this is the lineup I would actually go with, because this lineup, I think, solves everything, which is, and as I'm saying this, please examine what the bench would look like if this was your starting lineup, right? That's half the battle. So one half of the battle is you're super fast. Like, this lineup is super fast. It's super twitchy. It's super switchable. You have four guys in Barnes, Anunoby, Siakam, and Achiuwa who can absolutely switch everything from 1 to 5, and they can bother guys. In Achiuwa, you have a great rebounder. Barnes, Anunoby, Siakam, really above average rebounders for their position. I think Siakam's average for a power forward, but Scottie and OG are definitely above average rebounders for a guard or a wing. And Dowtin is just, super low maintenance. He's just going to space the corners. And I think there is really solid reason to believe that he could be a much better shooter than he has shown. And Precious Achiuwa, of course, just transition terror. I think you're faster with this team. I don't think you're giving up too much size, because you have just enough size at the 2, 3, 4, 5 to make up for the fact that Precious Achiuwa is slightly undersized at the 5. I think you're active. I think you're disruptive. I think you're a transition team. I think you can play 5 out, especially if Precious Achiuwa and Pascal Siakam and Scottie Barnes can be more threats from the 3. Are you lacking some of the dribble penetration stuff? Honestly, man, don't sleep on Jeff Dowtin. Do not sleep on Jeff Dowtin Jr. I think he can do a little bit of that stuff. I think he can get into the paint. He's just young enough right now that he could be a part of this next iteration of what you're trying to build up. I mean, Kyle Lowry was what, 26 years old when he got to the Toronto Raptors. Fred VanVleet was what? I mean, he was 22. But like, granted, like these are, this is kind of a tradition with the Toronto Raptors, isn't it? Overlooked, discarded, thrown away, but we embrace them. We embrace them, we nurture them, and we grow them into what they can be. I think Jeff Dowtin is the next iteration of what a Raptors point guard could be. I think he's really good. I might be the highest person on him outside of his own agency and his own family, but I stand on this. Now, just imagine for a second what the bench would look like if that's your starting lineup. Think about it, man. You could have the best bench in the NBA. No cap, not kidding. Imagine the bench unit. Can you think of a bench that is situated to deal with the following 5 players? Just imagine it. Just think about it. You got Dennis Schroeder and you got Jakob Poeltl running pick and roll. Around them, you have Grady Dick, Jalen McDaniels, and Otto Porter. Yo, who the hell is dealing with that? And then when those guys aren't in, you might have a guy like a Chris Boucher being a terror. I mean, god damn, right? You have your pick and roll. You have, and those guys can play a ton of minutes. I'm not against Dennis Schroeder and Jakob Poeltl averaging 26, 27 minutes. They average 26 minutes as a starter. They'll average 26 minutes off the bench. It doesn't matter. You can pull Gary earlier. You can pull Jeff earlier. You can pull Jeff and Precious earlier and bring those guys in. And that way, if you're pulling, let's just say, for instance, after 5 minutes, you pull Jeff Dowtin and you pull Precious Achiuwa and you bring in Dennis Schroeder and you bring in Jakob Poeltl. Well, guess what? Now you're just playing with the lineup that you're currently playing with right now. But at least you got off to a better start where you don't have so many mouths to feed, number one. Number two, you get this game off with pace and space. I believe in this. I am a disciple of this school of thought that the more space you have to navigate, the better it is for especially your straight line drivers. Now, we need to start thinking long-term about the development and ascent of guys like Scottie, OG, and even Pascal. And I think that for these guys to thrive, you need to use some of the same logic that the Milwaukee Bucks used with Giannis, which is you cannot put non-shooters around them, and you need to give them space to attack. Well, right now you have a center that you are, telling me is going to be the next Domantas Sabonis, who's going to be taking up a lot of that space that these guys need to attack. Okay. And teams are going to live with him catching the ball and doing the playmaking responsibilities because it's going to take the ball out of one of your better players. And unless you're going to make an argument that Jakob Poeltl is one of your 2 to 3 best players, I really don't understand this. So it's just my thought. And I'm not saying that this lineup, I'm not suggesting that this cannot be successful. I'm not suggesting that it cannot be successful. You might be successful with that lineup. I'm not saying you can't be. What I am saying is that if my goal as a coach is to make life as easy as humanly possible for my 3 best players, that this would be my choice. Now, let's get to some of the comments. And this live is, it's gone a little bit longer than I would have liked, but time to do it. Just ask for darker content. I have it already. If Porter Jr. is healthy, we will easily get 45 wins. All right. Barnes, OG, Porter, Precious, Poeltl. Where's Pascal? I think this lineup could be absolutely terrible, actually. Flynn, Thad to Pistons for one of their centers. Which one? James Wiseman? Have you guys... Hey, Greg, what's up? Have you guys seen Jonathan Kuminga? Apparently Chris Paul took him under his wing. He's been great. He's been really good. I mean, he was really not very good last year, even though he shot 37% from 3, but he's looked pretty promising so far in preseason. Again, straight line driver with space. I mean, shit, it's not a difficult concept to understand. Well, I mean, okay, he needs to be deadly from three. I'm sorry, is Jakob Poeltl deadly from three? No. Is Dennis Schroeder deadly from three? No. Neither one of these guys are deadly from three. So why does he have to be deadly from three? I think he's an above average 3 point. I think he can be. If I had to put an estimate on what he could do with like four really good players as just like a guy who just catches and shoots, I think he could be like a 36 to 38% 3 point shooter. Easy. They'll never start doubting over Dennis. Why though? You know what I mean? Like Dennis Schroeder was a minimum contract guy like a year ago. Like because he was on the Lakers, like there's some cachet here. This is like the Austin Reeves effect. Like why? You know what I mean? Like I'm not trying to shit on Dennis Schroeder. I'm not trying to make a habit of shitting on Raptor point guards. I think he's a good player, and I think he had a hell of a run with Germany. But please, the way that people talk about this guy and the way they've been talking about him all summer is really trying to bother me. I mean, you understand that I'm the biggest Fred VanVleet detractor probably on the planet. And even I am very bothered by some of the people saying that he's better than Fred VanVleet. He's not. Even in his decrepit state, Fred is a better player. Like you chill, okay? Like he's not a bad player. He is definitely a rotation player in the NBA. You have to ask yourself: is he the type of lights out shooter and the low volume, low usage guy, and the defender that you want to put next to your three players? Because see, like you can't prioritize everything or you prioritize nothing, right? For me, the goal is very simple: put Scottie, Pascal, and OG in the best possible situation to succeed. That's it. Okay, it works wonders for you. Number one, for OG and Scottie, it's a developmental thing. For Pascal, it is, to appease him, also for his contract, but also if you are looking to trade the guy, you want him to be in a good situation. You certainly don't want to put a player on the court, who's going to hurt his value. Now, I'm not, no, look, Dennis and Jakob, there's another very good reason to start them, which is that they're very experienced and very smart players. You're actually putting two very, very smart players with your three best players. However, there are some clear disadvantages to playing these guys when it comes to spacing. Okay. Like, I mean, shit, like there just are. Like I watched a lot of Dennis Schroeder over the last like couple of years. Trust me, like defenses are not hugging him at the line. Like his percentages are respectable. He is a respectable 3-point shooter. He is not a lights out 3-point shooter. He's not a deep 3-point shooter. He's not Dame. He's not Fred. He's not these guys. So you have to understand what you are doing. Like when you have a Scottie Barnes and a Pascal Siakam in your lineup, the other three guys have to be lights out. Lights out. And the only player who is lights out or close to lights out is OG. So those other two guys have to get closer to that. And I understand that maybe in an ideal world, you would have a Brook Lopez. You would have a Brook Lopez and a Malcolm Brogdon, or a Brook Lopez and a Drew Holiday. Like that would be your ideal fourth and fifth starter to put next to these guys. But you don't have those guys. Fine. You don't have a defensive juggernaut at the point guard to put. Well, put your best point guard defender, which in my opinion is Dowtin Jr. You don't have a lights out 3-point shooter to put at the center. Well, then put Otto. I mean, he's close, or put Precious. Like at the very least, you're getting a little bit more spacing. I could be wrong. I don't think I am. I hope at some point this year we'll get a chance to see this lineup play, and we can play this out for ourselves and see what happens. Obviously, in my consideration, I have not talked about Christian Koloko, but ironically, last year Nick Nurse started Christian Koloko. Was Christian Koloko as a rookie better than Chris Boucher? No, just fit. He just fit. He just fit with four guys who needed touches as a guy who didn't need touches. And I think sometimes you need that. So if your goal is to, at some point you're going to have a game where OG or Scottie are going to be fifth option again. And I don't get it. I don't get it. I watched this thing last year with, again, it comes down to short term, long term. Like the Raptors have a very vested interest in being good in the short term because you don't have a draft pick and you don't want to surrender one to the Spurs. And but that's secondary. That's my secondary concern, because at the end of the day, you surrendering a draft pick to somebody, it's bad PR, but it doesn't really affect you. Either way, you're giving up a pick, right? Whether you give up the 20th pick to the Spurs this year because you had a great season, or whether you give up the 7th pick because you had a disastrous season, how does it impact you in any way? It impacts the Spurs. You've already lost the pick. The only way it can possibly impact you is if you absolutely suck and you get the 4th pick and then now you have a lottery pick. And that would be a disaster because this draft sucks. And now you lose your draft pick the next year. My point is, the longer term vision should be what is, in my opinion, important here. And if you're looking at longer term vision and what is important, then the importance here is that you need Scottie and OG to be great. You need these guys to get on the same level as Siakam. And you can pray that one of these guys get to the level of a Jason Tatum. Like that would make this whole thing work. So development requires the ball. Giving the ball to Jakob and Dennis Schroeder, two guys who are, in their late 20s, and I think with Schroeder, he might be 30. And, maybe not the ideal long-term pairing. I mean, are you telling me in 3 years you really want to be seeing, Jakob Poeltl starting next to Scottie Barnes? I don't get it. No, you need a spacing big. You need your Brook Lopez. Like, trust me on this. This is not going to be a long-term solution. Jakob starting at the center is a short-term thinking. I think Dennis Schroeder starting at the point guard is also short-term thinking. So look, I'm not suggesting that Jeff Dowtin is, going to be your 5-year solution at the guard, but I watched Eric Snow start next to Allen Iverson. And if there's one player that, apart from, the shooting and the weird funky jump shot, that really reminds me of Eric Snow, it's Jeff Dowtin. And I loved Eric Snow. So anyways, I just wanted to say this. It's kind of cool to do a live in the afternoon. Usually we do these lives super late and people are just like, yo, bro, 1 a.m., midnight. So we got one out of the way in the day. Hopefully that's good for the algorithm. Certainly good for me. I got some editing stuff to get to, so I'm going to get to that. But it was nice to chat with y'all. And let's see, any more comments here? What? No, he's not. Schroeder is Darko's guy. Yeah, I don't want to hear any of this. This guy is this guy's guy, because I'm sick of that shit. Saw enough of that shit last year. Don't doubt it. I mean, like, he's good, but he's not great, and he is a higher usage guy, right? Now, if he can buy into being a lower usage guy, I get it, but it's like, why would you want someone to become someone that they're not? Dennis is a floor general, still waiting for a breakout game for him to silence the haters. Bro, like, he's been in the NBA for a really long time. I mean, I could pull up his entire career stats for you. Trust me, he's not a starter in the NBA. Like, he's not a good starter. Like, I what do you want me to say? Like it's like I'm happy they signed him over Gabe Vincent, because I like him just a little bit more than I Gabe Vincent. But neither one of these guys is a starting point guard in the NBA. So if you're going to tell me that you're having a starting point guard who is, in his prime, well into his prime, and probably on the decline right now, I don't get it. Like, I would rather go younger. Like, what is the point? Hey, these are stopgap solutions. This is a stopgap solution, man. Like, I'd rather start Grady. You want my honest opinion? I would rather just start Grady and just call it a development rep. And yeah, you'd be a little bit worse, but wouldn't he be better off for it? Would the starting lineup spacing be better off for it? Probably. Would your rebounding be better off for it? Yes. What are you losing here? I don't know. His old videos are gone? I didn't know that. That's interesting. He's had really great seasons, though. I prefer DS. All right, guys. Make sure to hit subscribe, like this video on the way out. Except he's not way better. He's just not. Like, I mean, he's marginally better. Yes, I'll concede to that. Look, I'm being 100% real with you. Dennis Schroeder is marginally better than Jeff Dowtin Jr. as a player. I get that. I do. I'm not talking about who's better, because Jakob Poeltl is also better than Precious Achiuwa. I don't care about that. That's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that your 5 best players don't always match well together, right? Now, the rationale here is, it's like with math. It's to those of you who follow this channel, you know that I'm very big on math, that I tested gifted for math, that I tutored in math, et cetera, et cetera. Math is a really big part of my life. Stats are a really big part of my life. One of the things with math that I think anyone can understand, I think even grade 5, grade 4 kids can understand, is variables, solving for variables and assuming for variables. If you assume that Jakob has to start, then you necessitate Dennis Schroeder having to start because you need you need a point guard who can be a respectable enough shooter that defenses have to respect that pick and roll. I'm just at a point now where there's a sunk cost fallacy where, okay, you traded a lot for him, so he has to start and it'll be a PR nightmare. I'm just talking pure basketball. I'm talking pure basketball. I'm talking 5-on-5. What is my best 5-man unit? And yeah, I think if there's internal pressure to start Schroeder because he's the big free agent signing and they need, to mentally, say we've replaced Fred. If they need to start Jakob Poeltl because they feel like a lot of pressure on themselves because they gave up so much to get him last year and they like him a lot. This is one thing. I get this, but this is not 2006. You don't need a center necessarily like this in your starting lineup. It's not necessarily the way teams are going right now. I think you'll see it across the league. The teams are going with centers who can shoot, the centers who can space, and that all the guards in the NBA are going to have advantages that Scottie, OG, and Pascal are not going to have because they're going to have a center that they can put 25 to 27 feet from the basket, which is going to pull the big out and open up. Just imagine how much more efficient Scottie and Pascal and OG would be as drivers if they didn't have to constantly attack against a couple of bigs in the paint. This is the whole point of spacing. It not only makes, your shooters, who are actually your shooters, far more effective because the help is so much harder to get. It also widens your driving lanes, but also once it widens your driving lanes, it also makes it almost impossible for the defense to come back and actually give you a double or a strong contest. So we've seen Scottie Barnes, shoot 55% on the contested hook shots. Okay. Now imagine what Scottie could do with an open paint. Like shit, man, he could shoot like 62, 65% from like around the basket. So I really hope that Darko is not biased. I also hope that there was no internal, promise to Dennis Schroeder that, hey, come here and you can start. I really hope that was not the case. I like him. I like him and Jakob. This is not a slight against those guys. I happen to, however, have a prioritization of Scottie, OG, and Pascal above everybody else on this team in terms of, and I guess I could put Grady in that group as well in terms of his development. Like, I think if you're talking future of this team, guys that you expect to be here for the long haul, those are your guys. And if Pascal is traded, well, then we'll have a different discussion. But if he's not traded, then he's definitely going to be a starter for this team for the next 3 to 4 years. You're not going to pay him a max to sit on the bench. You need to do stuff to maximize those 3 guys. So that's all I'm going to say. And we'll talk later. Have a good one. I'll see you guys tomorrow after the Chicago game. Peace.